As an additional help to you, we would like to offer the following fuel pump installation tips courtesy of the Federal Mogul Technical Education Center. First, when estimating a fuel pump replacement job, always be sure to include time and/or cost in your estimate for tank cleaning. Online estimating guides only give you an hour's estimate for the actual pump removal and installation. Also, when you return fuel to the tank that you drained at the beginning of the job, make sure that you use some type of strainer to filter out contaminants. Otherwise, you could be reintroducing a problem. Electrical connections are one of the most common causes of misdiagnosis. Let's take Chrysler vehicles, for example. On some Chrysler applications, the most common failure mode will be the complete loss of continuity. Other Chrysler applications will have partial continuity loss, creating an excessive voltage drop. The pump will be energized, but not enough to fuel the system. So, when replacing a Chrysler application pump in which a problematic connector could be the culprit, be sure to replace the connector as well. On GM applications from the mid-80s to the late 90s, the most common failure mode of electrical connections is a partial loss of continuity, although a total loss may occur as well. On GM applications utilizing hanger assemblies, an inspection of the connector between the pump and the underside of the hanger must be made. If there is evidence of a black sooty deposit across the connector or pins, or if they are melted or the wiring close to them is melted, the wiring harness must be replaced. Our problem-solving electrical harness addresses this type of situation. Part number 888536 contains the modular plug and wire terminals that can be simply installed on the hanger, replacing the failed harness that contributed to the original fuel system failure. On GM applications utilizing fuel pump module assemblies, if there is melted plastic around the terminal, the vehicle wiring harness connector that plugs into the top of the module must be replaced. The plastic at the point where the terminal protrudes from the plastic connector should have a pyramid shape. Heat generated by a failed terminal will cause the plastic to melt into a spherical shape, or blackening of the plastic may be evident. The location of this faulty connection makes it impossible to diagnose this problem using a voltage drop test. It is very important to carefully inspect the connectors on the old module for this failure. If a failure is suspected, the section of the vehicle wiring harness containing this connector must be replaced. Part numbers 888543, 888544, and 888553 cover the GM modules. For complete tips and instructions, see the warning tag included in the box and attached to each GM module. In the case of a Ford pump, always be sure to check for loose connections at the hanger ring terminal. If the terminals are loose, the hanger must be replaced. If the hanger contains a pulsator, it should be replaced with a new unit or replaced with a fuel hose with a minimum rating of SAE R9. In the case of GM Vortex CPI engines, the fuel pump is sometimes misdiagnosed as the cause of fuel system failure. A low-pressure no-start situation is not necessarily caused by the pump. A key-on, engine-off pressure drop could potentially signal a failing CPI unit. The fuel pressure regulator contained within the CPI spider assembly is notorious for failures. As this regulator begins to fail, the unit will begin opening and bypassing fuel before system pressure is achieved. The poppets at the end of the tubes require a minimum of 37 to 43 psi to open, but please remember that the fuel system requires 58 psi for the vehicle to start. This failure is easy to diagnose by pinching off or blocking the return line. If pressure increases and exceeds maximum vehicle system pressure, the problem is a bad CPI spider assembly and not the fuel pump. Another common failure with the CPI spider assembly is the pressure regulator, or leaky tubes. This failure will cause engine-off fuel pressure to slowly drop, creating hard starts. To rule out the fuel pump check valve, disconnect the fuel supply line from the fuel filter. Plumb a fuel pressure gauge to the fuel line coming from the pump and energize the pump just long enough to achieve at least 60 psi. With the pump off, pressure should not drop more than 20 psi.